Let's say that you're a startup founder out there and you're launching your service and you've launched with a freemium model. Anyone who's tried to figure out how to price their services, how you can have different subscription levels, and then within those subscription levels, you have different usage levels, trying to find that right balance of what you offer in free versus what you offer in paid plans that maximizes, both conversion as well as revenue is a classic business problem. Typically, to be able to do that, it requires modeling all your different user segments and how they respond to pricing changes. You need to account for, users that pay, how many of users don't pay, run a bunch of stress tests to kind of try to see in different scenarios to run this. Typically, if you've done this the old-fashioned way, this can take a data analyst days to weeks. What I'm going to show you today is actually doing this in Nebula, and honestly, I was able to do a very sophisticated set of 41 scenarios across a sample size of 10,000 users, all in essentially an afternoon. So let me show you how I did that. Now, if you've been on AI Twitter recently, you've heard of Autoresearch. Andrej Karpathy, famous AI researcher, lots of followers, released a project he called Autoresearch. Well, what if you can have an AI system that runs its own experiments? So it can run its own experiments, it evaluates its results, it can modify its approach in its own, essentially, feedback loop. All you have to give it is give it an objective, give it a way, a mechanism to generate your candidate solutions, give it an evaluator, i.e. like how can the system score each candidate that's generated, and then a rule for selecting, right? And so the idea is like you can just have an agent, an AI agent that is running, given the mechanisms and the evaluations, will essentially select the best and will continue to kind of optimize and give you that best solution. I did that today just with prompts in Nebula. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So if you look here, I'm on my dashboard. You'll see that a lot of my recent activity has been in this channel, which is pricing.autoresearch. And so this is essentially where I did all the work today. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you, walk you through the prompts. And so I basically put the prompt as almost as how I described it to you. I said, I found a project. Actually, someone did this with chess on social media, and then Andrej Karpathy, Autoresearch. So I gave this information to Nebula. I said, hey, these are sources you can kind of look at of people who have done this. My idea is I want to give my AI agent something to optimize and a way to measure it. The agent should make the change, and it should basically do this self-improvement loop. I want to do this for our SaaS pricing, and I want you to build a pricing simulator. From that, I basically want you to put all of that into our pricing.autoresearch project directory. And so that's on our virtual computer, right? And so this is where our virtual computer comes into play and why it's really powerful. So if you look here, I have a full-blown file system here that I share with my AI agents. And so prior to prompting, I had actually created this pricing auto research, and then I had gone to this data directory. And I want you to kind of think of like, well, to build this system, all I had to do was have some prompts and essentially provide some data. And there were two CSVs that I uploaded. A usage tracking CSV, which just kind of showed like from my existing user base, think of it as your existing user base. I had some usage tracking information, and then also some information around what those users are subscribed. Some of them are free, some of them are paying customers. This is all kind of made up data, but you get the idea. So I uploaded those two files, subscriptions and usage tracking, and then going back to then our prompt. So I prompted that. And if we look at the activity that kind of happened here, you're going to see that as soon as I gave it that, it created a plan after doing a bunch of research. So it went out, it researched everything it needed to know about auto research and everything, and presented me with a plan. Now I provided some feedback to that plan. Right, so here is its plan. You can kind of see it's going to analyze. It told me everything it's going to do. It's going to analyze the two CSVs that I gave it, and it's going to extract and create cohort profiles using that. It's going to create a bunch of Python files. It's going to create a script for deployment of our simulator. So there's a service out there called Modal, which I mentioned in my prompt. It allows me to be able to like deploy essentially a simulator service out on it. What Nebula can do is it can run locally and it can issue requests to that API to essentially run the different simulations. So I gave some feedback. I gave it some information about the current pricing. It came up with another plan. I gave it a little bit more information, mentioned the fact that I do have a modal token ID and a token secret. And this is pretty cool. Since I mentioned that, it knew that it should create 2 environment variables. And so it actually created 2 private environment variables that I could store that information into, the token ID and the token secret. And then it stored those credentials. Once that was done and we proved the plan, I watched as it essentially built the whole thing. What did it do? So it built our pricing config. So think of the pricing config. It's called the genome, but think of the pricing config as being, this is all of the parameters associated with pricing. That the simulator, essentially when it runs a scenario, what it's doing is it's taking one element or a couple of elements within a pricing config and it's making an adjustment. And then that is being recalculated. So we have a simulator, which is essentially the simulation engine. The modal app.py, this was actually just a Python script that was used to deploy to modal. And so you can actually see here that it had deployed a endpoint on modal. I actually have that up here as well. So you can kind of see that it deployed this simulate endpoint, which was then used to actually run simulations. You can actually see the function calls that happened here on modal. Again, that was all done by Nebula. I did not have to do anything there. Created a full project on my device along with a README, and then also generated the baseline. So think of it as that it went through and analyzed the usage as well as the subscription CSVs that I gave it and essentially created the baseline. The baseline being then how any new scenario was going to be measured. And so if a scenario was run and its composite score is below our baseline, that one is thrown away. But if it's something that improves, then that one is kept, right? And we try to, and it's basically doing this walk itself. And this is the power of Autoresearch. It's just walking up to find the optimal permutation. So all of this, it deployed the endpoint and then gave me essentially, and this was really cool. I didn't ask it to do this, but Nebula did this for me, which was, hey, there's a local version of this. So if you just want to run it locally, again, I have a full virtual computing environment included with my Nebula. And so I can run things locally, or I can run it remotely against the modal endpoint. And so it essentially created this bimodal ability to run the engine. And so the rest of this is me kind of going back and forth, right? So I told it to run 20 iterations and I said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to change the tier prices. Maybe there's some free credits we want to give in each tier, any surcharges that, maybe we charge on top of usage. Also to play around with features. Think of feature flags within different subscription plans. Basically play through all of those, run through them, and that's what it did, and then generate a bunch of scores, right? And you can see here kind of like after running that first 20 iterations, you can see which ones it wanted to keep, which ones it reverted. And as we said, the baseline being a score of 0.806, anything above that is a keeper. Anything that's below that is revert, i.e. give it away. And then of course, after running those scenarios, there's one which is which is, let's say, at least that local optimal, which you see here. And then I told it, well, run different pricing, $5 steps, see what happens. So just continue to run here, generating these. And like anything, once you're done with this, and I had done this, I want to share this with my team. And so the last thing that I said is well, let's create a visual dashboard. I think that would be super cool, right? That I could use to essentially walk my teammates through. And so it created a dashboard.html file right here that if I turn off safe mode, you can kind of see, which is pretty cool, which essentially is like an HTML file that I can share with my teammates, as well as some write-ups here that were, that helped to kind of summarize what the findings of this was. In kind of summary here, what I would say from a Nebula, what got unlocked here by using Nebula, number one, basically I only had to describe the problem in plain language. Nebula was able to frame the methodology. It directed all of the work. It deployed everything. It synthesized all the findings. Data analysis. right? That's something that Nebula was able to do, both in terms of actually performing the analysis, as well as actually, if I needed visualizations of that data, it's able to generate those sorts of visualizations. It's able to execute code. We talked about that with the virtual computing environment. It was able to access serverless compute on Modal. It's integrated. It can generate reports. Like I said at the beginning, I was able to set this up in one afternoon, what would have taken weeks for others. Even if you are trying to use AI tools or trying to install Autoresearch yourself, give it a try. I will tell you that it's going to take more than a couple of prompts to be able to link that whole pipeline together, integrate it, with Modal, and get it working. So now I essentially have an engine now. It's all set up. Anytime I want to run a scenario or a new set of scenarios, after talking to my team, it's a matter of me coming in here and expressing that in natural language. And so extremely powerful.